Hey everyone,
Hey guys.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Today we're going to be talking about the highest paying travel states, but also about the states where you can save the most money. A lot of you might think that those two things are the same thing, synonymous. In a lot of cases, there is overlap, but what you have to take into account with areas where you can save the most money is both the cost of living and also the tax rate. So there are situations where a state can pay really high, but that the tax rate and the cost of living there is so high that it offsets how much you can actually save. So we want to talk about both of those depending on who you are and your situation. Both of those might be important to you. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll jump in.
Hey guys, for those of you that may be new to our page, we're Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We have both been travel PTs on and off for the last 10 years. We are coming at you live today from Facebook and also TikTok. So we'd love if you'd say hello in the comments and let us know if you're watching live. You can also catch the replay later if you don't have a chance to watch live or don't have time to watch the whole thing. We'll post the replay on our podcast as well as our YouTube channel, which are both just Travel Therapy Mentor. Jared and I, as I mentioned, we've been travelers on and off for the last 10 years. We've done a lot of education over the years for fellow current and aspiring travel therapists. If you haven't yet, you can check out our website where we have a lot of free articles. And we have lots of past podcasts and videos that you can watch about just about every travel therapy topic that you can think of. We like to provide you guys a lot of information and education because back when we first started as travel therapists in 2015, there really wasn't a lot of information out there. We have worked in 5 different states and in several different settings. Outpatient is definitely our main focus, but we've also worked in skilled nursing, home health, and hospitals. So we have a lot of experience to share. So we want to talk to you a bit today about where you can expect to make the most money, because a lot of people that we talk to that want to get into travel therapy, the pay is the primary reason. We know that the student debt problem is a big issue for a lot of therapists, especially those that went to master's or doctorate level programs, such as ourselves with the DPT. So a lot of you are thinking about getting into travel therapy in order to make the most money. So we want to help you to find those high paying contracts, but also the ones where you're going to take home the most money when we take into account things like taxes and cost of living. So we'll dive into that. And again, if you're watching live, we'd love if you just say hello. I see a few of you guys are on live. Hi, Jalen. Hi, Enrique. What's your TikTok? He says it's also just Travel Therapy Mentor on all the platforms. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all major podcasts platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So yeah, find us under Travel Therapy Mentor there too.
Yep. I zoned out for a second. Can you talk about where this information came from?
No, so I haven't dove into the data yet. So we gathered data from all the different companies that we work with. Do you want to tell them more about that?
Yeah, so we have about 14 companies that we work with right now. So we asked them for data to try to get some of this information. Some of this was interesting to us. I mean, I always knew like probably the top few, I guess, travel therapy states, but some of the ones further down the list I was very surprised about. So the companies gave us a lot of input, and also we've used like our job list over time. We see these jobs that pop up. What you have to remember too is that every state has outliers in jobs. So there are situations where you might see $3,000 job in Georgia or something like that. And, those jobs every now and then, crisis type jobs, they really need people. Say they have like 10 openings suddenly. Sometimes they might pay a lot of money for those jobs, but those are outliers. So the states we're going to talk about are the average highest paying states and the average states where you can save the most money.
Yeah, and so the data that we gathered, this was last month in January. So you have to also keep in mind that there is some seasonality. So I do have a feeling that a few of the states that were listed with the top pay could be because we're in winter, and so some of them were the more northern states. Whereas in the winter, they have more difficulty attracting candidates to go to those more northern, more snowy locations. Whereas in the summer, it might be the opposite. Maybe people don't want to go down south because it's too hot in the summer and they'd rather be up north. So there is a little bit of that to it. But I do think in general, this list is going to be pretty consistent across the board. And so we'll talk first about which states are going to pay the highest if we're only talking about gross pay, just the highest pay package out there.
Yeah, so the list basically from highest to lowest, or top 10 or 11 or so. California, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Alaska, Illinois, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Missouri. So yeah, some of those were a big surprise to me. I would have never thought Maine would be on the list. We wanted to work in Maine. We tried to get. Did we get licensed in Maine?
No, we thought about getting licensed in Maine, but we ended up working in Massachusetts because there was more job availability.
Yeah. So we wanted to go to Maine. At the time, this was back in 2015, 16, we were looking at that. Maine was pretty low paying. I remember a lot of the jobs that we did see there were pretty low. So that surprised me. And then also Missouri, I definitely would not have thought that would be in the top 10 or 11 states.
Yeah, and so the trend here for a lot of the high-paying states, obviously California is always one of the highest paying. We also see pretty high pay usually in Alaska, but then a lot of them were like the Northeast states. So you see your Vermont, your Massachusetts, your New Hampshire. I think New York was close to the top. We didn't have it on the top 10, Maine. But then also some of your Midwest. So Missouri, Illinois. I even saw on a different list that I was looking at, close to the top was Nebraska. So Montana was on there. And again, I think that could be seasonal too. So it was kind of California, Washington, Alaska, and then it was Midwest and Northeast. So as you can see, like a lot of your Southeast locations, your Florida, your Georgia, your South Carolina, you're not going to see the highest pay packages there. Even where we're from, Virginia, you're not going to see the highest pay packages there always. And then some of your like Arizona, New Mexico, not necessarily going to be on the top of the list. Texas, not always the highest paying.
Yep. If you guys have any questions about anything as we go through, feel free to ask those. See quite a few people on TikTok now. So one thing about Alaska that I thought was interesting, Alaska is definitely one of the highest paying states. And for it to be like number 6, I was interested, but I started thinking more about it. And I think the big reason why that happened is because around Anchorage, the pay rates are not that high because it's an extremely desirable area. So like when we worked in Alaska 3.5 years ago, we weren't making a ton of money, but we were in like the ideal location. We were exactly where we wanted to be in Anchorage. If you go anywhere outside of Anchorage, though, the pay rates are very high. So if you took Anchorage off of that, off of the list, or pretty much just the surrounding area, the rest of Alaska pays usually extremely high, probably $2,500 or more on a normal contract. And there's some that'll pay $3,000 or more. So Alaska would be probably right around where California is, probably number 1 or 2. But because Anchorage is very high demand, they pay lower there, and some of the bill rates are kind of low, and then the pay packages are lower.
Yeah. So those are the top ones that you're going to see the highest gross pay package. Now, if you're not familiar with how travel therapy works, gross means before tax. And generally what they're going to do is they're going to quote you a weekly take-home pay, which is your total gross pay package for the entire week, which includes your hourly and your stipend pay. But what's really important when you're comparing jobs is to compare the net pay, which is going to be the amount that you're actually going to get in your bank account every week after taxes. And I think the surprising thing to a lot of people is that you not only have to take into account the state that you're going to be working in, but you also have to take into account your home state taxes. So this surprises a lot of therapists that are new to travel therapy because they think if they go to states like Alaska or Texas or Florida, Florida, right? And Tennessee that are zero income tax states, they're like, this is great. I'm going to make all that money and I'm going to keep all that money because they're not going to take out state tax. All I have to worry about is my federal taxes. Unfortunately, that's not the case because as a travel therapist, you're also going to get taxed in your home state, and then you're going to pay basically the greater of the two. So if you're from a high income tax state like New York, and you go take a job in Texas, well, you're still getting taxed high from New York. You just have to pay the higher of the two. So the taxes they're still going to follow you to that location. Whereas if you live in your home state is a zero income tax state or a lower to moderate income tax state, you're not going to get hit as much when you work in one of those zero income tax states.
Yeah, so that's kind of why in the beginning I said it depends on your situation, because if you're from a zero income tax state or a very low income tax state like Florida, then it makes a lot of sense for you to work in a lower tax state because you don't have to worry about a high income tax at your home state. Whereas, yes, if you're Illinois, New York, those types of tax rates, then working in a low income tax state doesn't really make a difference for you. So it really depends on your situation, what your home state is. But that's very important to keep in mind.
Yeah. In addition to thinking about the taxes and looking at the net pay, and the way that you can do that is when you're comparing these jobs, if you're working with a recruiter, you can have them quote you the net pay and they'll run an approximate net pay for you. Or you can use a website like the one that's called Paycheck City, and it'll just have you plug in, your home state and the state where the job is, and you can run a rough estimate of what the gross pay package will be after taxes. So it's really important that when you're comparing jobs to decide, am I going to take job A or job B or job C, look at your net pay. In addition to that, though, we also want to look at the cost of living in the area. And this is where it's really going to come down to how much of that money are you going to keep at the end of the day after we consider rent.
Yep. All right. So the top 5 for that, when you factor in taxes, cost of living, pay, Washington State is at the top of the list. New Hampshire, the Midwest, and then surprisingly, I guess number 4, top 4, California. So California surprises people because everyone talks about the cost of living in California and the taxes in California. But there's some misconceptions there. I wrote an article, it's been about 3.5 years ago, we were in Alaska, about effective tax rates for states. So something you have to remember is people talk about states and they say, oh, tax really high in this state or tax really high in this state. Often, almost always, the state taxes are, what is the word? Marginal. So like if you make low amount of income, then your tax rate's low. And as you make more money, the tax rate increases. And in some states, there's a huge gap between what the lowest earners pay and what the highest earners pay. California, for example, I think I can't remember the exact numbers, but low earners pay almost no state taxes. High earners pay up to 10% in state taxes. So it's a massive difference. So when someone talks about tax rate being high in California, they're looking at the high end of that marginal state tax rate. For us as travelers, since our taxable pay, assuming you're traveling with a tax home, our taxable pay is pretty low on average. The tax rate in California is actually really reasonable. And I did a rankings, if you're interested, if you go on Travel Therapy Mentor and search for state income taxes ranked or something like that, I ranked all 50 states, and California was in the top 25 states. So most people would think it was in the very bottom, like the worst state, but it really isn't. And that's because of that marginal tax rate and how it's progressive. So California, you get paid really well. The tax rate is not as high as people think for travelers. And also outside of the major cities, cost of living isn't always that high. So if you go to a more rural area, more inland of California, you can make a ton of money and save a lot of money there.
That article on traveltherapymentor.com is called Which States Have the Best Tax Rates for Travel Therapists, State Tax Rates Ranked. So yeah, that's definitely a consideration, is the taxes, as we talked about, but I think cost of living is definitely probably higher on the list than worrying too much about the state taxes. But as Jared said, it does surprise a lot of people to find that with California, you're really, not necessarily going to get taxed as high as you think. And I think the more important thing you need to take into account in California is going to be the cost of living. So in those more popular places like San Diego and more coastal locations, sometimes the pay is going to be lower because of supply and demand. There's more therapists already working there. They have less job openings needed for travel therapists, and then it's more competitive to get those jobs. So you're already going to be contending with lower pay packages in general in places like San Diego, the more popular places, and also higher rent. But if you go to some of the lesser known parts of California, maybe a little more inland, like Jared said, you might actually come out ahead because some of the pay packages are so high in California. We consistently, for the last decade that we've been involved in the industry, have always seen that California pay packages are some of the highest. So quite often you can still come out ahead in California. We definitely see some of those upper 2,500, 3,000 net pay packages in California, way higher than that in gross pay as well.
Yeah, so Northern California, and also I always think about Bakersfield. Bakersfield, there's always jobs, they're always pretty high paying, and the cost of living is not crazy compared to, for example, the Bay Area or San Diego or something like that.
Yeah. And of course, this is all relative, right? Like a lot of people are like, well, I don't know, I paid high rent there. It's like the rent is pretty high all across the country right now, but relatively, like, for example, we used to travel in an RV. When we were working on the East Coast, we could find RV rent for RV parks anywhere from $500 to $900 a month. Whereas travelers that were working and had an RV on the coast of California, what was the rent for just the RV parks back then?
Some cases it's like $2,500 a month. We looked at some
just for an RV spot to park your RV. So
yeah, probably more now. This was 8 or 9 years ago. And even like the coast of Massachusetts, there were some that were like $3,000 a month. So everything's relative, but yes, on average, more rural areas, more inland, it's going to be lower cost of living.
Yeah. So what are some of the highest that you're going to come out ahead? We mentioned Washington. That tends to be a really good one where pay packages are pretty high across the board. And some areas, especially outside of Seattle, you can find moderate rent. And it's also a 0% income tax state. So as long as you also live in a state that has relatively lower income taxes, then you're not going to have to pay income tax to Washington. You'll have lower taxes there. So Washington in general is a good, well-rounded state to come out ahead pretty well financially in Washington State. We heard that pretty much across the board from a lot of the recruiters in their experience placing travelers there, that they come out ahead financially in Washington.
Similar to California, you want to avoid the big cities like Seattle, Tacoma, those areas. The cost of living is going to be really high. But if you go somewhere like Spokane or further west off the coast,
or not a major
east,
city,
yeah, just outside of the major cities, you'll make a lot of money. The cost of living is not too crazy, and then there's no state income tax. So Washington State overall, outside of the cities, is probably the best in terms of being able to save a lot of money.
Yep. We didn't have Alaska on here as one of the top few. I do feel like Alaska, you can usually come out ahead pretty good financially, but it just kind of depends. Some of the places, the rent is still going to be pretty high, but there are some places in Alaska where if it's really remote, they'll actually include housing too. And then you really come out ahead financially because everything you're making is going in your pocket after taxes. Like, you're not having to pay for rent. And a lot of times you don't even need a car if it's that rural. Sometimes they actually like bus you to the local hospital that's like a half a mile away. So there are certain places in Alaska where you're going to come out ahead financially, but some places the rent can be kind of high.
Yeah, we've known travelers in Alaska that made $2,600 a week take home. Their rent was paid for there, and also they had a car for free. So in that situation, you are saving a ton of money. I mean, you have very low expenses. Yes, food in Alaska is a little expensive, but compared to rent prices in places, food is not a huge concern. So if you can find a job like that and you're willing to go to more remote places, you can make a ton of money in Alaska. But like I said, a lot of this is skewed because Anchorage, the pay rates are not that high and cost of living is pretty high. So when we lived there, we were not saving a ton of money because we were paying like $2,600 a month for rent, which is the most we've ever paid anywhere.
And also that kind of goes back to timing though, because we were in the most popular city in the most popular time of year. We were there in the summer.
Yeah.
Had we gone in the winter, if your goal is just to make the most money, you can make a lot of money in the winter in Alaska, but maybe not quite as much in the summer when you take into account rent and the competition for housing there.
Yep.
So something to think about with Alaska. The next one on our list was New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is one of the New England states that has pretty good pay packages. We see pretty good pay rates up there, but New Hampshire is a 0% income tax state. So again, if you fall into that category where you're also from a low income tax state, you're going to benefit there. And then also, relatively speaking, now, I mean, New England in general, the Northeast is known for being a little more expensive cost of living, but compared to the other states around it, it's going to be maybe a little bit lower cost of living. There's a lot of places in New Hampshire not too far outside the big cities where you can pay a little less in rent, especially compared to places like Vermont and Massachusetts and New York that are a lot more high cost.
Yep. And then the Midwest, so like Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, the big reason that those places are high on this list is because cost of living outside of the cities, again, is pretty low. So the Midwest pretty consistently has the lowest cost of living, besides like maybe the Deep South, Alabama and Missouri or Mississippi and things like that. Some of the lower cost states. So even though pay packages are definitely not going to be as high as like California or Alaska, the cost of living is so low that it makes it so that you can save a lot of money there. So the Midwest is usually, I mean, not a lot of people are like clamoring to go to the Midwest, which is also why pay packages can be pretty high because the competition is low.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to like a rural place in Missouri or a rural place in Illinois, you can make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Make and save a lot of money. And sometimes we do. Sometimes they're really overpaying to attract talent there because they really are desperate for therapists. And so, sometimes, in the winter especially, they're just like, we really need your help. So you might see some of those $2,500 a week net, 25 plus. Our friends, we know some people that are making close to $3,000 a week right now working in the Midwest in the winter, and it's like, it's not the most desirable area, but they're making a lot of money. So there's money to be had in the Midwest if financial gain is your goal.
Yeah, and a lot of this has changed. 10 years ago when we started these Midwest states, it was rare to see jobs paying more than like $1,500 a week take home. And it was only like California was like the only state where you could ever make more than $2,000 a week take home. So a lot has changed, a lot more jobs available. Pay has gone up significantly. I would say across the board, pay is probably up 30 to 40% compared to where it was 10 years ago. And yes, cost of living is also probably up 50%, but on a relative basis, pay has kind of outpaced cost of living, I would say. So like if you're, for example, if for us in the RV, if we were making $1,500 a week and paying $400 a month in the RV, well, now the RV rent might be $800 a month, but now we could make $2,500 take home. So even though the cost of living has doubled in terms of the living expense is small compared to how much you actually make per week. So I think overall now is a great time to travel, way better than it was for us. And then, of course, like I said, a lot more job options. And another thing to take into account with all these states is that if you're working in a higher paying setting, you can always make more money that way too. So if you're working, say, pediatric outpatient, you're not going to make a ton of money even in these high paying states. But if you're working home health, you can make a lot of money, especially California, Alaska. So really, it's different for everyone depending on the setting you want and everything. But on average, it's really good to consider these states.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about some of the highest gross pay states, the ones that you're gonna come out ahead financially in terms of taxes, the ones you're gonna come out ahead in terms of cost of living. And then as Jared mentioned, the big thing to consider here is the setting. And so home health does tend to pay the highest. So if you're someone who has experience or has interest in home health, if you can get into that setting, we know a lot of therapists making really good money. That's typically the ones that we're seeing that are like close to that $3,000 net is going to be in home health. Also, maybe within some of these higher paying locations already. Next, kind of middle of the pack, you're going to see hospitals, outpatient, and skilled nursing kind of paying middle. Or I guess I'd say hospital and outpatient are kind of like moderate, some really good paying ones as well. Typically, your skilled nursing and your schools are going to pay a little on the lower end. And as Jared said, like specialty settings like outpatient pediatrics, a little bit on the lower end. That's not always the case. There's always going to be outliers, but in general, that's kind of the trend we see would be like home health, hospital, outpatient, skilled nursing, then schools and peds and specialty clinics. So those are some big factors to consider. And then we also mentioned taking into account time of year, and the demand for certain locations depending on the season.
Yeah, it's especially the case for areas that have like snowbird type situations. So a lot of people want to be in Florida in the winter, and in some cases that's good because there's a higher number of patients there because there's an influx of population. But in some cases it's bad because everyone wants to go to Florida in the winter. And it's kind of the same way for Arizona. We wanted to go to Arizona in the winter. We were going to go there in our camper. This was probably 5 years ago. And it was really difficult to find any jobs because a lot of people want to go there. It's beautiful weather for the winter. So you have to take that into account. In some cases, it's good to go where the population of patients is going to be higher for a certain part of the year, but in some cases, it's bad because the reason it's higher population at that time of year is because everyone wants to be there.
Yeah. If you guys are watching live and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and leave them in the comments and we'll answer them. If you watch later or listen later on the podcast and have any questions, you can always send us a message on social media or you can send us a message via our website at traveltherapymentor.com. I just see, I think Allie said good day. Hi, Allie. Thank you guys that have joined live. Yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the comments. Otherwise, we'll just do a quick recap on how you can go about finding the highest paying contracts. We do typically recommend that you work directly with a recruiter to help you find your jobs. You can definitely search job boards online, but quite often, we've talked about this before, by the time a job has time to hit a job board, you have time to see it and you have time to apply to it. In order for you to get all your paperwork and all that done and start talking to a recruiter for the first time, quite often you're already behind all the other competition looking for that job. But sometimes job boards can be helpful if you're just browsing and you're kind of keeping things in mind for later, like you're trying to look at trends. We do that a lot. Like we'll look at different job boards online to look at trends and kind of see what the market is doing. You guys can check out our hot job list at traveltherapymentor.com/hotjobs. Or maybe it's just /jobs. Let me check the URL.
I think it's jobs.
So that way you can just kind of keep an eye on what's out there. And there's other, jobs out there. It's /hotjobs, traveltherapymentor.com/hotjobs. So that's one way you can do it just to kind of check the trends. But in general, we do recommend that you work one-to-one with a recruiter. Usually we say like 2 to 3 recruiters at different companies so you can compare job options. And they can also give you really good advice if you're working with a solid recruiter. We usually say, go with someone that's been recommended to you by someone who's experienced. So like you can ask us for recommendations. We can help you get connected with a good recruiter. And then it's someone that someone else has vouched for, right? And they have good experience, they have good wisdom, and they can kind of guide you on your job search and say, oh, I've had other travelers that have had good experience in this location, made good money in this location. We tend to see a lot of high-paying jobs in this area. The cost of living is moderate in this area. So start by, browsing the jobs, keeping an eye on where you're seeing the highest pay packages, work with the recruiter to get some wisdom on the locations. Now, if you see a job presented to you, do a quick run of the pay package or have your recruiter do a quick run of the pay package to see what the net pay is going to be. So you know what the taxes are going to be and if you're actually going to come out ahead that way. Then you can do a quick search just to get an idea of what the housing and the cost of living is like in the area, and think like, oh gosh, is it actually going to work out for me financially or not? And then also, of course, take into consideration setting and time of year.
Yep. You have to be very careful with the housing if you're going to somewhere that's high demand, because we ran into this in Alaska. We kind of accepted jobs. We normally will find housing or make sure there's no questions. Make sure there is housing available before we ever accept a job. But in Alaska, we accepted the job. We were like, oh, we'll find something. And it ended up being way harder than we thought and more expensive. So you don't want to be in that situation where you're planning to go somewhere, the clinic's already planning on you to be there, and then you look for housing and it's all $4,000 a month or something. So it's a good idea to have a cursory look at that first. The job board thing, like Whitney said, it's good to browse. It's good to see what's available, but it's very difficult to land like a high demand job off a job board because everyone else is going to be submitting for that job before you ever see it. So definitely a good idea to work with recruiters directly. Find a few that are good fit for you, good companies that will be able to kind of compete with each other and offer you the highest pay for those jobs as soon as they pop up, instead of, being matched with a random company, random recruiter for a job that's probably going to fill before you ever even get submitted for it.
Yeah. So hopefully that was helpful in, helping you guys decide where would be best for you to work in order to make the most money and get ahead financially. Again, please reach out to us if you want help getting connected with recruiters who can help you with your job search. And again, we have a lot of free information on our website. You can go back and listen to our older podcasts and videos to gain more wisdom and information about how travel therapy works and how you can come out ahead financially. We use travel therapy in order to semi-retire and no longer work full-time. So we definitely come at travel therapy with a lot of financial insight. We look at it from a financial lens in order to use it as a means to an end to get ahead financially, to design your lifestyle how you want. And that's what we've done. We don't work full time anymore. Now we've designed a lifestyle that we want thanks to travel therapy and thanks to being financially savvy. Yep. So we'd love to help you be able to do the same.
Whitney sent out an email this week talking about this, but we're constantly curating this list of their companies and recruiters based on feedback that we get from you guys, also the performance statistics we see from the recruiters and the companies, because we want the companies we send people to be able to place them, obviously. Like if you want to find a good job and everything, we want to send you to companies and recruiters that will be able to place you in those jobs. So we're constantly getting feedback and curating this list. And so 2025, we removed a few companies, we added new companies, we added several new recruiters. And we feel like, based on this process of honing them over time, we have a very good handle on the market and who to send who to. And what I mean by that is some companies specialize in some areas and have certain jobs that other companies don't have. So I think our process is very good for being able to send people to companies that will have the jobs that they want.
Yep. And that's a free service. You can just go to our website at traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters and fill out that recruiter recommendation form. It's non-obligatory. All you do is just fill it out and tell me your settings that you're interested in, your locations you're interested in, when are you planning on starting, what's a priority for you, is it mentorship, is it highest pay, are there certain settings that you have to have, is it more location-based that you have to have. Let me know what your priorities are and I'll look at it and I will send you back 3 recruiters from 3 different companies that I think would be a good fit for you. So it's personalized for each individual. And as Jared said, we have a lot more insight into who would be a good fit for you than someone who's only ever worked with 1 or 2 recruiters. It's definitely okay to get recommendations from friends if your friend has had a good experience with 1 recruiter and you want to work with that same recruiter. But we have a lot more wisdom and insight, having looked at, dozens of companies and hundreds of recruiters over the years. And all I do is I send you the information, and if you want to contact them and set up a phone call to see if they seem like a good fit, you can, but there's no obligation for you to work with them. I just give you options.
Yep.
So yeah, reach out if you want help with that, or if you just have other questions about how to get started with travel therapy. We've helped thousands of therapists over the years, so we would love to help you as well.
Yep. All right. I don't think we have any questions. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yep.
If you have any questions after this, you can always ask and we'll come back and answer them later.
Yep, or send us a message.
Yep.
All right, have a great night, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Bye.